Oh, the car emancipation rides majestic through our nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty, our nation's glory. Moving along, moving along, moving along through the nation, freedom's car emancipation.
You are listening to the song Get Off the Track, performed by the Duchess Anti-Slavery Singers. The song was written by Lynn's own Hutchinson family singers. The Hutchinson family singers were noted abolitionists who traveled the states performing songs of anti-slavery. Their other causes included temperance and women's suffrage. At Hutchinson's request, the city erected the Stone Tower Observatory, which replaced the previous structure, which had been destroyed by fire. The prominent Hutchinson family built a home and several other cottages on the lower part of the site. Our city is proud of the Hutchinson family, and we are also proud of our adopted favorite son, escaped slave turned abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who lived in Lynn with his family from 1841 to 1848. Year one was a modest affair, with a few dozen citizens under a tarp in the rain. Over the decade, the event has grown to become a family day of music, food, and fireworks. But the main event is the community reading of Frederick Douglass's famous speech, 44 paragraphs read in sequence by diverse citizens of Lynn. Hello, this is Wendy Joseph. Last year, we spoke on the systemic injustice that the COVID-19 pandemic was highlighting. The struggle was in our homes and in our streets. Frederick Douglass spoke on the philosophy of reform. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions to change have been born of earnest struggle. If there is no struggle, there is no progress, because power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. How have we progressed since last year? What have we seen in 2021? In March, high school seniors Carlos Prudencio and Damiane Garrido proposed a Black Lives Matter mural to the city council, which was approved. And Carlos and Dami just announced that the artists have been selected. This past April, the jury in a Minnesota district court found the murderer of George Floyd guilty of all charges. In June, President Biden signed a bill into law, making Juneteenth a national holiday. We should be proud that here in our city, the North Shore Juneteenth Association has created programming like the Black Excellence Awards and has been celebrating Juneteenth since 2017. Lynn's Racial Justice Coalition has worked with the city to implement body cams in our police department, and the city council recently continued their support with a $500,000 allocation for an unarmed crisis response team. We have struggled, and there has been progress, but there is much more to be done. The history of racism in America is still being written. Write yourself into this history and agitate, agitate, agitate.
Welcome to the 11th annual reading of Frederick Douglass's speech, What to the Slave is 4th of July. As mayor and a lifelong resident of Lynn, I am honored that one of the best-known abolitionists and orators, Frederick Douglass, wrote his autobiography in 1845 right here in the city of Lynn. He devoted his life to fighting the evils of slavery and championing the cause of African Americans across the country. He made his mark in the city by often giving compelling speeches at the Lyceum building on Market Street and involving himself in the local churches by pushing for equality and human rights. He is part of the history of Lynn and one of the reasons why Lynn was accounted as one of the strongest anti-slavery cities in the country. We owe it to Frederick Douglass for us to continue to be a city where, regardless of your background, people can find a home here in Lynn. This is a place Douglass found refuge. We must continue to uphold his legacy by working to champion the rights of all those who are oppressed.
Hi, I'm Darren Sayre, and we're here to talk about Frederick Douglass and how important of a man he was to our nation. Especially this past weekend when we celebrated Juneteenth. This is a man who fought his entire life, not just for the freedom of black people, but for the freedom of everybody. He's the most extraordinary man, one of the most extraordinary men in the history of America. He spent more time traveling around this nation and being beat on, pushed on, picked on, but yet he still triumphed. He still rose up above all of that. Let's remember Frederick Douglass. He was a great man. Thank you.
It is now my honor and privilege to begin What to the Slave is 4th of July. Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever having appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable. The difficulties to overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude.
For the purpose of this celebration is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. And I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, the simple story is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home imposed the exercise of its parental prerogatives. Upon its colonial children, such restraint, burdens, and limitations, as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty, men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to this then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid all their terror and frightened vociferations against the alarming and revolutionary idea, moved on, and the country with it.
Clothed with that dreadful idea with all the authority of a national sanction, they did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon our resolutions drawn up in our day, whose transparency is at all equal it.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property,
resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your fathers made good on that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the rights of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar, and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light, and my burden easy and delightful.
But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems or inhumane mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of the right, ought to be free and independent states, and that they are absolved from all allegiances to the British Crown.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, and in the name of the Constitution and the Bible which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America.
I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not at heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear some one of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists failed to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued.
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
11 statute books are covered with enactments forbidding under severe fines and penalties the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man.
For the present, is it enough to affirm that equal manhood of the Negro race? Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metal of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having amongst us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we engage in all manner of enterprises common to other men,
digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave. We are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today, in the presence of Americans, to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous, and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would, today, pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity are, to him, more bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up to crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which is especially prosperous just now and carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy.
In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade. In order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated.
That trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it,
this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhumane traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man.
It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade,
the men engaged in the slave trade between states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of the internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers, armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit the purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon the young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength.
Suddenly, you hear a quick snap like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. The gash on her shoulder tells her to move on.
Follow the drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the United States.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men.
By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your Secretary of State enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and, without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture.
Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the rights of marriage and to all the rights in this republic, the rights of God included. For Black men, there are neither law, justice, humanity, not religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them.
An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and 5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient under this hell Black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary Black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the cases of man's liberty to hear only his accusers.
In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 millions of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad, honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bear your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world and are understood by the world to declare that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in a bondage, which according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a seventh part of the inhabitants of your country.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth. Be warned, a horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you this hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair in this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I, therefore, leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around in the same old path of its fathers without interference.
The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arms of commerce have borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, stream, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In this fervent aspiration of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it.
God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow.
In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood.
And each return for evil good, not blow for blow.
That day will come, all feuds to end,
and change into a faithful friend, each foe.
Oh, the car emancipation rides majestic through our nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty, a nation's glory. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along through the nation, freedom's car, emancipation. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along through the nation, freedom's car, emancipation. First of all, a train and greater speeds the dauntless liberator. Onward cheered amid hosannas and the waving of free banners. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along, spread your banners while the people shout hosannas. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along, spread your banners while the people shout hosannas. Let the ministers and churches leave behind sectarian lurches. Jump on board the car of freedom ere it be too late to need them. Sound the alarm, sound the alarm, sound the alarm, puppets thunder ere too late you see your blunder. Sound the alarm, sound the alarm, sound the alarm, puppets thunder ere too late you see your blunder. Railroads to emancipation cannot rest on clay foundation, and the tracks of the magician are but railroads to perdition. Pull up the rails, pull up the rails, pull up the rails, emancipation cannot rest on such foundation. Pull up the rails, pull up the rails, pull up the rails, emancipation cannot rest on such foundation. All true friends of emancipation, haste to freedom's railroad station. Quick into the cars, get seated, all is ready and completed. Put on the steam, put on the steam, put on the steam, all are crying and the liberty flags are flying. Put on the steam, put on the steam, put on the steam, all are crying and the liberty flags are flying. Hear the mighty car wheels humming, now look out, the engine's coming. Church and statesmen, hear the thunder, clear the track or you'll fall under. Get off the track, get off the track, get off the track, all are singing while the liberty bell is ringing. Get off the track, get off the track, get off the track, all are singing while the liberty bell is ringing.